There's this fantastically funny, but honestly kind of painful cartoon from the 1950s that just hits the nail on the head when it comes to reading complex texts. It shows a young man frantically flipping through his Bible, and he turns to his sister and says, "Don't bother me now, I'm trying to find a scripture verse to back up one of my preconceived notions." It's a great reminder of a trap we can all fall into. Because let's face it, if you pry a text completely out of its context, you can twist it to say pretty much anything you want. And in the narrative we're looking at today, we're going to see exactly how dangerous that can be, especially when it's literally the devil doing the quoting.
Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to dive deep into the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness. But we're not just looking at this as some isolated standalone event. As you'll see from the scholarly sources we're analyzing today, this narrative is actually a brilliant, deeply structured typological contrast. It's setting up ancient Israel on one side and Jesus Christ acting as the new Israel on the other.
So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the pitfall of context, look at ancient Israel's wilderness failure, then Jesus as the true new Israel, the actual battle of Scripture, and finally, the triumph through perfect obedience. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. Ancient Israel's wilderness failure, the probationary period.
Okay, to really grasp what Jesus is doing in the wilderness, we first have to understand the deep-rooted biblical concept of testing. And in the Bible, testing has a very specific mathematical metric attached to it, the number 40. 40 is not just a random measurement of time, it's the ultimate metric for divine probation, testing, and preparation. When you see the number 40 in these texts, you're meant to immediately recognize, a period of intense spiritual trial is happening right now.
When you dig into the scholarly commentary on Luke's Gospel, you see this historical precedent everywhere. The number 40 is mathematically linked to the flood, to Moses fasting on Mount Sinai, to the 12 spies inspecting Canaan. But absolutely crucial for us today, it's linked to ancient Israel's journey in the desert. After the Exodus, the Israelites were tested in the wilderness for exactly 40 years. It was a probationary period, right? Meant to teach them profound dependence on God. But, as the historical text tells us, they completely failed that testing. They fell into disobedience. They fell into idolatry. And that exact historical failure is the backdrop we absolutely must keep in our minds as we look at what Jesus does next.
Which brings us to part 2, Jesus, the true new Israel, typology and fulfillment.
When Jesus walks out into that desert, he isn't just wandering around aimlessly. He is deliberately retracing the historical steps of the Israelites to succeed exactly where they failed. It's like a giant puzzle, and the typological parallels are mathematically precise. Look at this. Ancient Israel was called God's son in Exodus. Well, Jesus is declared God's son at his baptism. Israel's testing was preceded by a sort of baptism through the Red Sea. Jesus' testing is preceded by his actual baptism in the Jordan River. Israel was tested for 40 years. Jesus is tempted for 40 days. But here is the ultimate contrast, the outcome. Israel failed its wilderness testing. Jesus, conversely, triumphs through absolute obedience.
And scholarly exegesis on Matthew 4 backs this up completely. These 4 pillars we just looked at strongly reinforce the idea that we are witnessing a deliberate theological reenactment. The text directly contrasts the disobedience of ancient Israel with the obedience of Jesus, establishing him as the representative of the new Israel. He's literally going back to the foundational failure of his people and rewriting the ending through his own perfect obedience.
Part 3. The Battle of Scripture, forensic exegesis of the temptation.
Now that we have that historical framework, we can look at the climax of the narrative itself. Because this isn't just a physical test of enduring hunger. It's an incredibly intense, high-stakes battle of textual interpretation between Jesus and Satan. The central question framing this whole wilderness encounter, especially in Luke's Gospel, is what kind of Messiah will he be? Having just witnessed God the Father's declaration of Jesus' identity at his baptism, Satan shows up to test that very identity. He wants to detour Jesus away from this path of suffering and obedience and tempt him instead to embrace a flashy mission of earthly political power and sensationalism.
And how exactly does Satan try to pull off this detour? Well, he uses the Bible. Satan literally quotes Psalm 91 at Jesus, telling him to throw himself down from the pinnacle of the temple because, hey, the text says the angels will catch him. But look at how Satan twists it. He completely misconstrues the text to advocate maliciously testing God. He wants a stunt, but the original meaning of Psalm 91, when you actually read it in its proper context, is intended to encourage trust and faith in God's genuine protection during hard times. It's absolutely not an instruction to manufacture a crisis just to force God's hand. It is the ultimate example of ripping a text completely out of context to serve a deceptive agenda.
So how does Jesus respond to this crazy twisting of Scripture? He doesn't just argue back, he drops an absolute masterclass in biblical exegesis. He counters Satan by quoting Deuteronomy 6:16, "You shall not tempt the Lord your God." Now notice where that quote comes from. It's from Deuteronomy. That's a text looking directly back at ancient Israel's failures in the wilderness. It's brilliant. Jesus handles the Scripture with complete reverence and contextual sensitivity. This perfectly in-context rebuttal absolutely dismantles Satan's trap, proving once and for all that you cannot twist a psalm of trust to justify an act of rebellion.
Part 4. Triumph through perfect obedience, the ultimate victory. So Jesus successfully repels all the temptations. He chooses penance, humility, and the will of the Father over earthly bread and political power. But what's the so what for us? Early church thinkers saw some incredibly profound layers of meaning here. Look at this allegorical definition from St. Ambrose. He notes that Christ's victory wasn't just some personal achievement, it was an epic rescue mission. Since humanity's expulsion from Eden, man had been languishing in a desert of spiritual death. So Christ deliberately goes out into the wilderness to pursue humanity, tracking us down in our place of exile to basically wrestle us from the grip of the devil. It totally reframes the narrative from a simple test of endurance into a grand rescue operation.
All right, let's synthesize everything we've unpacked today into our core takeaways. First, as we literally just saw with Satan's use of Psalm 91, Scripture stripped from its context is a massively potent tool for deception. Second, the biblical timeline is super precise. The number 40 mathematically links Christ's 40-day probation directly to ancient Israel's 40-year failure. Third, through his actions, Jesus flawlessly fulfills the role of the true new Israel, succeeding where the ancients stumbled. And finally, the narrative teaches us that true triumph requires reverent obedience to the Father's will, not the pursuit of earthly power.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. And it's a question I really want you to ponder as you continue exploring these texts. If even the devil can quote Scripture to serve his own agenda, how rigorously are we verifying the context of the truths we claim to stand on? It's a striking reminder that just having a quote isn't enough. We have to seek the full contextual truth. Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep questioning, and always keep seeking the context.
The triumphant new Israel.